Hey y'all, it's Lori. Thanks so much for clicking in today. Rental properties fund our boat life, and I still self-manage all my rental properties. So it was absolutely critical that I got my tenant screening process down pat. Now, tenant screening sounds scary, but it's really not difficult at all once you figure out what you need to do. And in this video, I'm going to go over the 4 main things you need to really understand about an applicant to understand whether or not they're going to be a potentially good tenant. Now, I recently posted a video about a tenant I had that broke their lease and left the house just absolutely filthy. And in hindsight, going back through my tenant screening process and results, I'm not surprised. I should have known better. I'll get to that at the end of the video, but first let's talk about the 4 things that landlords are looking for in good tenants. Now, this is not just critical information for landlords, it's also critical information for just about anybody who wants to rent a property. If you're looking to rent a property and you know in advance what your potential landlord is going to be looking for, then you can get out in front of any issues you might have and set yourself up for success to be the chosen tenant for the property that you want to rent. Let's get to it. The very first thing I always check and verify on any potential applicant is an income verification. In my area, a minimum income of at least 3 times the rent is pretty common. In fact, it's pretty much the standard in my area. Now, my area has a lower cost of living and has a lot of work opportunity. And that makes this area a pretty attractive area to a lot of people from all over the place. I understand that in different areas where the rental market is different and the income is different, the cost of living is different, that 3 times the rent might not be possible. I also understand that in other areas, 3 times the rent might not be near enough. My basic income guideline is that their income must be at least 3 times the rent before any taxes or deductions. So that's the very first thing I need to understand about an applicant, is can they afford the house? And as such, that's the very first thing I check. I'm clearly sitting outside today and I am puppy sitting, and I've got a bird that wants to, hang out and be in the video with us. Y'all want to see him? Let me see if I can zoom in on him. He's sitting on top of that power plant. There he is. That's the bird that you could all hear in the video. Hey bird, we're filming here. Oh, I hear his friend or his cousin or his relative, a bird relative. I hear his bird relative. Did you hear that? He's calling out to him saying, hey dude, she's filming over here, come on. So if the income verification checks out and everything's good there, I move on to the second step of the selection process, and that is in running a credit report. Now, understand that local laws, local jurisdictions have very strict rules over credit report and their usage of credit information. I'm only talking about what's perfectly legal and normal and customary in my area. It's very important for you to understand what is proper and legal in your area if you're going to run a credit check on somebody. Now, what I'm looking for in the credit check is simply, do they pay their bills and how do they pay their bills? And credit reports can be a little bit tricky, especially in this day and age, because so many people that are of renting property age have a ton of student loan debt. And I'll be honest, it's not my place to judge whether or not they should or shouldn't be paying these student loans. That is not mine to consider. But I don't lean too heavily on student loan debt. If somebody's behind on their student loans, that's really not the biggest deal to me. What is a big deal to me is I want to see, are they paying their car note? Like if they have made 28 of their last 30 car notes at least 30 days late, then I can bet that they're also probably paying their rent late. Maybe not. It's just a guess, but the greatest predictor we have of future behavior is past behavior, whether we like it or not. That's all we've got. That's all we've got to go on. In the credit check is what I'm looking for is, do they have any foreclosures in the last 5 or 8 years? Do they have any broken leases? Do they have any evictions? And do they pay their bills on time? All of those things are going to show up on an applicant's credit report. For me, in my properties, any evictions in the last 8 years are an automatic no-go. Now, a foreclosure is something that's a little bit different. We can get into that to another video. A foreclosure doesn't automatically disqualify somebody from renting one of my properties like an eviction does in the last 8 years, but we'll get into that at a different time. Or if you want to know more about why I would consider somebody who's had a foreclosure when I would not consider somebody who's had an eviction in the last 8 years, drop down into the comments below. Let me know if you want to hear about that and I'll give you all the details. Now, if I have an applicant that has passed both the income verification and the credit check, it's time to move on to the criminal background check. All of my properties are in neighborhoods. All of my properties have neighbors, and most of these neighbors have families. All of these neighborhoods deserve to have upstanding, normal, non-criminal background people as their neighbors. So anybody who has a felony conviction is automatically disqualified from renting one of my properties. And that's because a felony is a pretty serious crime, and somebody who's willing to take the kind of risk to commit a really serious crime is not somebody that I would need to place in a neighborhood to live and interact with families and children. You don't know what you don't know, but you do know that that one time they were willing to take a really big risk to do a really bad thing. And so that disqualifies them from renting one of my properties. The other thing on the criminal background that would disqualify somebody from renting one of my properties is a violent misdemeanor. Now I know there's a big difference between misdemeanors and felonies, but any act of serious violence that results in a conviction of a Class A type misdemeanor, which is a pretty serious misdemeanor, is not eligible to rent one of my properties. And that's simply because I refuse to place people who have shown a propensity for violence in neighborhoods with families in my house. It's just not cool. I wouldn't want somebody moving a violent person in next door to me, and so I don't do that to other people. Now, the fourth and last thing I check before making a decision on whether or not an applicant is eligible to become a tenant in one of my properties is their rental history. Rental history is important, whether we like it or not. I'm going to say it one more time. The best predictor of future behavior is prior behavior. I only ask 3 questions of their previous landlords. I ask, do they pay the rent on time? Yes or no? And then I take that information. The next thing I ask is, did they receive their deposit back in full? Yes or no? I don't ask for details because as a landlord, I know that most of my tenants do receive their deposit back in full because most of my tenants take really good care of the property. They've gotten through the selection process. They're good people. They do good things. They need a clean, safe place to live, and that's what I provide. They rent the house. Almost all of my tenants get a full refund of their security deposit. So I understand that if another landlord has issued a full refund of a security deposit, then that's a pretty good indicator that I would be able to do the same. And that means this person took care of the property that they were living in reasonably. And that's what I'm looking for. And then the third question I ask a previous landlord, and it's just a simple yes or no, would you rent to them again? And that is a huge indicator on what their experience was as a landlord working with this person. Would you rent to them again? Yes or no? And this rental history check is where I went wrong with my bad tenant experience. My tenant that had broke his lease and left the house a mess said he didn't have a rental history. He and his family had been living with a family member, and they had been living with a family member for several years, so they didn't have a recent rental history. They didn't even have a rental history in the last 5 years. But they were a young couple, so I thought, okay, that kind of makes sense, They were expecting a new baby, and they had just run out of room at the house that they had been living with a relative in, and they had to find another place to rent. So they had no rental history. In hindsight, I should have said, okay, there's your red flag. This applicant does not meet the requirements to rent one of your properties. You should have kept looking. But I didn't. I rented to him, and he broke his lease, and he left my house trashed. But, at the time, I thought, okay, they're a young family, it makes sense, and everybody deserves a chance. And I wanted to help them out. And would I do it again? Gosh, I don't know. It hasn't been long enough since I've had to deal with all of that for that to not bite like it does. But I would rather take the chance. You know what? No, I wouldn't. I won't do it again. I won't do it again. If somebody does not meet all 4 of these minimum requirements to be a tenant in one of my properties, I won't do it again. Ew. I don't know if I like how that tastes. Anyway, so now that all my properties are rented again and I don't have anything sitting vacant and the passive income thing is working, and I'm gonna get back to the boat life, hang out there for a little while until the new year, because next year I've got a lot of real estate stuff going on. I've got to buy several houses, and I've got a lot of stuff that I'm gonna do, and some other houses I'm gonna do a 1031 exchange. I've got a lot going on next year, but I can do all of this from my boat. So I hope you do consider subscribing to the channel and come with me on that whole adventure and see how all this works out and see how rental properties are funding our boat life. Thanks so much for hanging out with me for a few minutes today. It's been great chatting with you. Until I see you next time, bye y'all.